they're labeled as masculine and feminine, but those unhealthy ends of the spectrum, they're just unhealthy.
Most masculines that don't understand the divine masculine aspect of it, they are walking around as a ticking time bomb because we've been programmed through those unhealthy behaviors, those unhealthy conditionings, when we were younger. Hey everyone, it's Joey from the Reality Practice Network. Thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned after the show and find out how you can work one-on-one with your show host as they guide you through this process of ascension. Until then, enjoy the show.
And there's both sides of the spectrum, right? There's the unhealthy spectrum of the feminine where women feel very, very needy and codependent. They feel, they're overly emotional. They're clingy. They're looking for someone to save them, protect them, etc. They're in that victim place. But there's a lot of men who are in that place too, right? And so what is that, right? That's just that unhealthy end of the spectrum. And if you really think about, they're labeled as masculine and feminine, but those unhealthy ends of the spectrum, they're just unhealthy,
right,
whether
right.
they're masculine or feminine. Because if you're in that, if you're in that stronger spectrum of what's considered masculine, and there's aggression, and there's anger, and there's confrontation, and there's all of these things that are on that unhealthy spectrum of what's considered masculine. Again, it's I've shown up that way, like because why? I mean, why does that happen? Well, that happens because we're stuffing down all of this emotion, and most people don't ever process it or deal with it. So you're kind of like a ticking time bomb, and it's not necessarily going to take much to set off that ticking time bomb. And somebody's just going to get the short end of the stick one day. And you're going to go off on someone, and it's not even really that person. They just happen to draw the short stick because you've been walking around like a ticking time bomb.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's most masculines that don't understand the divine masculine aspect of it. They are walking around as a ticking time bomb because we've been programmed through those unhealthy behaviors, those unhealthy conditionings. When we were younger, we get injured, we scrape our knee, rub it off, walk it off, throw some dirt on it, toughen up, men don't cry, things like that. And it's been this whole aspect of stepping into our feminine and finding it has been so suppressed that now we just instinctually, out of biology, react in that aggressive explosion, in a sense. Whoever's around at the moment, that all that subconscious programming of not allowing us to feel, not allowing us to express the emotion, it's got to come out. The tea kettle is literally ready to pop and blow off all the steam. And I think that's a lot of what this show is going to help people do, is to recognize those unhealthy patterns and to recognize it's okay as a masculine. I can honestly say, from my point of view, it's okay as a masculine, and it's our duty as a masculine to get in touch with our feminine aspects, that emotional side. Again, we can over logic frickin' everything to death because that's what our programming does. As the masculine, we only see the logic through biology. But when we understand the emotion, the intrinsic, the intuitive emotions that are within us, that's where the real change starts to happen. Same with the feminine. When you recognize the intuitive nature within us, that it's okay to experience both. We have to experience both. If we only stay on the one end of the spectrum, we can't evolve. We can't become one. We can't truly create the reality we desire. We can't co-create the life we want if we're only living in one aspect. Well, I take that back. We can force our way. The masculine can push through and force his will, which goes against every basic universal law, but it can be done. And there's throughout the history of time, it's been done. Wars have been waged, leaders and all of the people in history, they have forced their masculine will upon the world to get what they want. So, I mean, yeah, can it be done that way? Absolutely. But as history has shown, when we force the masculine, when we force that will, it usually doesn't end good, if ever. We have to find the balance there. I think one of the good sayings that I had was the queen, the feminine, can only come from love and compassion. They have to step outside and become a little bit of masculine to find that divine masculine, to find that focus, to rule more harshly, maybe, which we shouldn't ever do. But the masculine can rule hard with an iron fist, and his way or the highway. But it's his job also to see the emotion side of it, to see that he doesn't have to be a dictator. He doesn't have to rule with an iron fist. He can rule with compassion and love and step into the feminine. And the roles go back and forth, But I mean, at the end of the day, love and compassion is what creates it all.
But I think to truly lead with love and compassion, like I feel like, we can, that can really stem from that divine feminine essence, and it can also stem from the divine masculine essence. Because again, if you're at a level of divine, you've superseded the overarching, like the push, right? But like you said, I agree with you, right? Like, can you get there with that push? Sure. But what happens is you get there and you've been burning the candle from both ends of the stick, and you're still unhappy, you're still unfulfilled. There's never a contentment or a fulfillment in achieving something in that way. So there's more than one way to achieve. And, as far as the ticking time bomb, and I think it's important, I think this show is important, of also helping women understand that, because that was my truth for a long time. Like I said, if you're a very, type A, high achiever, successful woman, you've also experienced that, right? Where those same coping mechanisms apply, and you're stuffing down the emotion. You're not sharing or showing emotion. You're putting up the walls. And it's effective, right? It's effective for a certain period of time from a success perspective. But you get to where you're going, and then you wake up one day and you're kind of like, okay, well, what am I doing here? And I really am successful, but I'm still unhappy and I'm unfulfilled. And again, that's not masculine or feminine, but how we got there, right? We might have gotten to that same spot kind of from that masculine driven energy of the achieving and the doing. But the end result is the same. And that propensity to be a ticking time bomb. There's a lot of women who are in that same space, right? And you think about just life and society in general, we all, men and women, we all have so much thrown at us, and we all pile so much on our plate. And if you're kind of already running on fumes, and you've got all of this pain and this emotion that you've stuffed down, that you've never dealt with, that you've never shared, you've never shown, you've just been stuffing it down. You're working, you got husband and kids, the phone's ringing, and that one more thing just comes in, and you're just like, right? Like,
right.
because you were running on fumes to begin with. And I think that's, and again, I think that there's a lot of, room here for us to blur those lines. Like, that's not masculine or feminine, right? That's become life, right?
Right.
Where most people, most men and most women are burning the candle from both ends. Most men and most women are running on fumes. And so how do we get to this place where we have balance, where we are able to still perform and achieve, but we have this balance of flow and creativity that we can bring to the table? Because you can absolutely perform and achieve with ease and grace from a whole different space of just that push, that do. And there's an evolution where someone's functioning from their divine masculine and the divine feminine, because now you're coming from, right? You're coming from this place of who you are and who you're showing up as is coming from a place that's very grounded and very full. And so the chances of you kind of like blowing a gasket at the last moment becomes extremely slim, because there's not all of this stuff like brewing and festering that hasn't been dealt with, because you went there. You went there to deal with your stuff so that you're not lugging that stuff around. I was thinking about this kind of in preparation for this, and I remember there was an event that I did where we basically had to climb a mountain, and they made this game about it. And there was like some crap about getting these rocks and these boulders like to the top of the mountain. So people had backpacks, people were carrying like these rocks and these things. But there was like this teamwork aspect. And anyways, part of the exercise was actually like, learning to kind of like shed that baggage, right? Okay. And how to like become more efficient. So I was thinking about that, and it's like when we look back individually at our own past, we all have these boulders that we've been carrying around, and the boulder is attached to another boulder that's attached to another boulder, and half of those boulders were never even our effing boulders to begin with, but we're still lugging them around. And the shit's heavy, right?
Right. The question is, why do we lug them around? I think that we're lugging them around literally out of fear. What is that underlying fear? Of loss, of not having the abundance, not having something. I think there's an underlying fear that causes us to keep that baggage that we're lugging around. Wouldn't you agree?
Oftentimes, and I think oftentimes the fear is just like facing it and dealing with it. I mean, that was one of the scariest things I think I ever did, was face the truth of who was in the effing mirror.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
And those aspects of myself that I wasn't proud of. The fact, the parts of myself that weren't really me, but they were there, and I was showing up in that way, and I'm like, and I'm not even proud. I'm not even proud. So sometimes that scariest look in the mirror is the scary look in the mirror at the truth of not who you are, but who you're being at that particular moment in time. Because the truth of who you are is a divine being, right? But that's not what it feels like when we look in the mirror, or when we look back to our past. There's a lot of stuff. It's like, I think a lot of people fear that because they don't want to go there. Like, I mean, for me, like, I look at it, and I think most people look at the past, or like some of those things, like, with their parents or whatever. I think the fear is you look at that as Pandora's box, and you're kind of like, I don't want to open that box. But the truth is like, if you don't ever look back and you don't ever open that box and you don't ever address the boulders, you just keep lugging the boulders along. And instead of freeing yourself and the journey becoming lighter and more free and more fun and more incredible, you're just adding more boulders. And so the shit's getting heavier, the shit's getting harder. But the opposite is possible. So you got to let go of some of those boulders so that you can really, really flow and fly forward, and be free and live in a completely different capacity than most people really even know is possible, because most people are carrying the boulders and they think they have to.
Yes. Yeah. You're totally right on it. And it kind of goes back to this underlying programming and biology. We've grown up from this tribal mentality that the masculine had to perform. And if they didn't perform as the masculine, everybody might die. Everybody would die, whatever. So I think intrinsically, subconsciously in our mind, when we find ourselves, fast forward to today, when we find ourselves using or showing some of those signs or recognizing some of those signs of the feminine within the masculine, I think it's very confusing for a masculine. I think it's very confusing in the sense that like I said earlier, we're programmed to not show emotion. We're programmed to not feel, in a sense. We're programmed just to operate, think, and do. And I think a lot of that baggage, a lot of that fear that you discussed, that you just talked about, is the sense that we're trying, and it goes both ways with the feminine. We're trying to discover our true self and realize that our true self is both. And I think we beat ourselves, especially the masculine, we beat ourselves up for portraying or showing those qualities that make the feminine so beautiful, so amazing. But it's okay. I mean, it's 100%. This is who we are. We're evolving now at such an astronomical rate that these questions have to be answered. They have to be asked, first of all. Is it okay to show this feminine side as a masculine? You bet your ass. I mean, that is who we are meant to be. Now, were we that way 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago? No, we weren't evolved enough. We had to still provide, protect, hunt, and show no sign of weakness, because that's what the time called for at that present moment. Fast forward to current day, none of that is needed anymore. There's no need for that masculine to be the leader of the tribe necessarily and hunt and kill. What we're trying to understand is that it's okay to exhibit both sides of this, and to discover who we really are, which is that divine being of oneness, that both sides, the duality, the polarity of the three-dimensional world. We are both, and it's accepting that we are both and following that path. That you said it's scary to kind of go down that path. Yeah, it's real scary for a perceived masculine to accept feminine qualities. Doesn't mean you're gay. It doesn't mean it has nothing to do with sexuality, and I think that's a big problem with the perceived masculinity out there, or at least how it's portrayed, is if you show any feminine qualities, then you're not masculine. You're not, acting as the strong man, the leader. And it's completely absurd. But I think that's where we've been led to believe, we've been programmed to believe that is the case, but we don't need that anymore. It's like we're shedding that necessity. It's no longer needed. We know we can breathe underwater now. We no longer need an oxygen mask and air tanks to go underwater. It's just no longer needed in our evolution. We've grown gills in a sense and lungs, so we can do both.
Well, and those, that olden way of not being able to share or show emotion, and again, that's strictly, it's this smallness and this false programming and this false identification that sharing or showing any emotion is feminine, that it's weak. And it's not any of those things, right? Like emotions are also part of that biology. So I think the perspective of the biology, I mean, there is a very primal aspect of our brain, right? And there are primal aspects of our brain, and its job is survival. Its job is to protect us. And that's true whether you're a man or a woman. We all have some biologic, drives to survive, right, and to kind of procreate as a species. But the perception of sharing or showing emotion to be weak and for it to be feminine, that definition is something that was created and that has been programmed. And unfortunately, it couldn't be more from the truth, right? Because all human beings have emotions, right? Emotions themselves are energy. They're not masculine or feminine. They just are, right? Emotions. We're emotional creatures. We're emotional beings, and that's true whether you're a man or a woman. So there has to be brought to the attention what that inability, right? What that programming to not share or show emotion, that programming that vulnerability is weakness, and to look at it and to say, what has this programming cost me? Right? Because what it costs is the inability to deeply connect. What it costs is relationships with people that you care about, because you're unable to show up and have a conversation about the truth of just what you're thinking and how you're feeling, and whether it's good or bad, right? Like, even just to show up and share with someone how highly you think of them. If you struggle with vulnerability, if you struggle with sharing and showing emotion, you're not even going to be able to show up and share with someone how highly you think of them, much less show up and say, unfortunately, like, I just really, I think you're great, but I just don't see this progressing, as a future together. But again, thinking about what has it cost you? And it took me looking back to really say, what did my inability to be vulnerable, what did it cost me in the past when it came to relationships? And it wasn't something I was able to see until later on. And I looked back and just an example of for example, the first guy that I dated after my boyfriend passed away, about like a year later, I wanted to tell him, right, that I had a boyfriend that passed away, but I really liked him and I didn't really know how to tell him. And I was afraid, because I really liked him, I was afraid that he wouldn't understand. I was afraid that he would think like, oh, she's just going to be some emotional mess, and like, I don't want to deal with this. And so I was logically, as my brain did, attempting to kind of figure out a way of how do I tell him this? And what happened during that time of my inability to just talk to him and share with him, was we spent time together that happened to fall over that year anniversary of my boyfriend passing. Well, I knew that, but he didn't know that. So we ended up breaking up. And then like months later, we have a conversation. And I'm like, what happened? Because like seemingly things were great. And then it was just like, things were great. And then there was nothing. And I'm like, so we actually had a conversation. I'm like, well, what happened? And he's like, I don't know. He's like, I wish there was something tangible that I can tell you. I'm like, was it something I did? Was it something I said? Blah, blah. No. And then he really thought about it. And he finally looked at me and he said, if I had to say something, and he's like, and I don't know if this means anything, but he said, there were times that you felt so close. And he's like, that we just felt so close. And he was like, and there were other times that you felt a million miles away, even though you were right next to me. And he said, and it scared me and I didn't understand it. And he's like, and I think that's really why I left. And I looked at him and my heart just dropped, and I looked at him and I said, well, then that's my fault. And he said, what? What do you mean? And I said, well, because what you didn't know was this is what I was going through. And so when you felt like I was a million miles away, you weren't wrong. I said, because it was around the time of the anniversary, the 1-year anniversary of my boyfriend passing away. And in those moments that you felt that I was a million miles away. Now, do you think that had he known, here's this wonderful, beautiful man, and had he known, right, he probably would have been there for me. But my inability to tell him, to even give him the opportunity to be there for me, was completely gone.
That makes sense. It's the idea is the feminine feels emotional. The feminine feels the emotional energy, the love. They have to be able to bring that side of them out. But if they don't feel that they can be heard, if they're not in a safe space potentially, then the feminine will not open up. The feminine, it's like a flower blooming. If it doesn't feel like the energy, the sunlight, the love is there, it won't ever bloom. So in a sense, the masculine, its job, the masculine's role is to allow that safe space for the feminine side to bloom and to blossom, whether he did anything wrong or not. I'm just talking in terms of allowing ourselves to express the divinity in both aspects of it. We have to be able to understand and see how both sides are working. If I'm not compassionate, if I'm not open enough, if I don't feel I'm providing a safe space for me, then how can I open myself up and experience that feminine emotional side of it? It's like you're staying on one side of the fence, and you have to be able to provide the safe space for the feminine to blossom, but it all comes from within. We're battling, it goes back to that idea, we're battling each ourselves and which side of the spectrum we want to be on, because we think one side's better than the other. We think they just have different attributes. They have different aspects that are completely innate to them. The left brain, masculine, more or less. The right brain, feminine, creativity, beauty, creativity versus logic. And it's finding that common ground to where we can go back and forth. We got to stop beating ourselves up over which side is better. We have to have both sides functioning simultaneously. It's just which side do we resonate more with, and which side do we need to allow to express itself more? You mentioned the vulnerability aspect of it. And I think there's two different aspects. It's okay to be vulnerable, but it's not okay to be unloading of your energy, your emotion. That's two completely different reactions. If you're unloading your emotions, then you're coming from an uncontrolled state. Whereas if you're being vulnerable, you're in control, knowing that you're being emotional and you're letting that release out in a controlled nature, I guess, as opposed to just exploding and not being in control.
Hey everyone, it's Joey again. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked the show. Please make sure to give it a thumbs up if you did. We'd love to hear your comments too. And if you haven't already, please make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell to never miss an episode from the Reality Practice Network. As I mentioned before the show, I wanted to extend an exclusive offer to you, the viewers of the Reality Practice Network. For all of you watching this video, you're undoubtedly experiencing an awakening and are searching for more explanation into the experiences you're having. Now is the time to explore who and what you truly are. For a limited time, you can now work one-on-one with your show host. Click the link in the description box below to start your journey, or learn more by going to myrealitypractice.com/ascension and let your ascension begin. And remember to ask yourself, what reality are you choosing to create today?